Hi, and welcome to the Brohoyo Podcast, where we talk about Gacha in general and Hoyoverse games in specific. I'm your host, Steven, and allow me to introduce my co-host, David.
Heyo.
And this week we have a special guest, Joe.
Hi, pleasure to be on. Thank you guys for having me.
Well, we're real glad to have you. David, would you be willing to walk us in?
Yeah, of course. So last week, if you listen out, I kind of teased the new segment here that we're going to be doing for today's episode, which is going to be having a regular gamer introduce them to gotcha games. And so Joe has been trying out Genshin. I approached him with this about a month and a half, 2 months ago, I think, and said, "Hey, do you mind starting and playing Genshin as your first gotcha?" And this way he has plenty of time, so he's not feeling rushed or anything to get through it. And I believe we discussed getting you through Liua, if memory serves, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we're gonna finish up that main story quest and then get into Liua and be questing around there.
Okay. And so, yeah, as far as kind of your gaming background, so this is kind of your first experience with gotcha games, but what's kind of your gaming background? What'd you grow up with? What are the types of games you enjoy, and what platform?
Well, I've been gaming pretty much all my life, primarily PC gaming. I've done some console gaming, but that's definitely been a more recent thing, I should say. Recent in my late 20s and onwards, or in my 20s and onwards, I should say. But I grew up with SimCity and Command and Conquer, the original Warcraft, those sorts of games, RTSs, City Builders, Mech Warrior. Those were the games that really, really got me early on. And then as I continued gaming, World of Warcraft was a big portion of my life.
Okay, so the
Um,
RTS is being a real-time strategy for those that don't know, yeah, like the StarCrafts or the
correct.
Warcrafts in their original format, yeah. And then pivoted to the MMORPGs, that's the massively multiplayer online RPGs for Warcraft. You said that's taken a lot of time, probably in, I would imagine, the college years, as it were.
Yeah, high school and early college. Many, many hours were sunk into that. Probably far too many.
And what is the last game, like, what was the last game that you played in 2023 in terms of either single player or multiplayer that had your attention?
The current obsession that I have is Against the Storm. So it's a colony management roguelite,
Okay.
which seems like a really weird combo, but it's super addicting and really good. I've liked it a lot. In my more recently, colony management games have become very much what I've become interested in
Okay.
and what I focus in on. So,
And then I threw Genshin at you, which is not city or base management at all. It is
no.
an action role playing game. And so, what I want to jump into with Genshin, I just want to approach it first as from a game to game, right? We'll get into the gotcha elements a little bit later on. But as a game, let's talk about what jumped out to you from the beginning, whether it be, was it music, was it the world itself, was it the story, the lore, the characters? Talk to me about your first experiences with it.
Sure thing, yeah. So, first of all, the game is very beautiful. As someone who does a lot of gaming where, it doesn't matter if it's like super realistic or super, even really super nice looking. I mean, you know, Dwarf Fortress is not the nicest looking game, but those sort of things, you don't have to look great in order to be enjoyable. But when something does look great, it is noticeable. So it's a very beautiful game, and the world itself, I think, was probably the biggest thing. It's quite large, but I liked the various elements of exploration that it had in it. Little chests hidden everywhere, um, shrines of the depth, which I don't even think I really remember seeing like a quest or an impetus in game saying, "Hey, you should try this." It's just I came across this thing as oh, I do have a key for this. That's cool. So finding little things like that and just getting to explore the place, I thought that was really, really well done, and probably my favorite part of it.
So, real quick, when Genshin first came out, a lot of people drew comparisons between it and Breath of the Wild. Did you have any experience with Breath of the Wild or now Tears of the Kingdom as well?
No, The last Zelda game I played had the little demon chick who would pop out and you turn you into a wolf.
Twilight Princess.
Yeah,
Twilight
Twilight
Princess. Yeah, and that was good. I love that one. I went all through it. I have seen Breath of the Wild gameplay though, and visually they look very similar. I'm not sure what they used to render them, if it's the same.
Well, like Steve said,
software.
that was the comparison, yeah, when it originally launched. But I mean, both games, yeah, like you said, they do look good. You mentioned really liking the exploration aspect of it, and them just kind of, I guess they don't really hold your hand, yeah, in terms of telling you things. You just kind of stumble across them, as it were. Now, as far as the story, right? Because we talked about, you mentioned, the world being huge, and you've essentially explored Mondstadt, and you've dabbled deep into Liyue, I believe. Potentially not completed it yet, but you have dabbled deep into it to see it. And so knowing that those are two zones of content, and there are at this moment like 3, 4 more, depending on if you want to count Dragonspine as its own area.
I was including that in Mondstadt, but
Okay,
nonetheless.
Because it, in terms of scheduling, when it came out as its own little event zone area thing. But and it's higher level stuff, as I'm sure you've accidentally maybe frequented in there. So, these are red leveled characters. I probably shouldn't be here quite yet. But being a massive game, having gotten a good chunk of the story, that's kind of where I want to move to in terms of your take on the story. The old lost sibling, amnesia type stuff. And I guess the first question in the story would be, are you playing as the female protagonist, or did you choose the male protagonist?
I went with the male protagonist.
Okay.
And
Heretic.
it's interesting that you mentioned the twin sibling story portion, because I had actually kind of forgotten about that. I had been focused on the Stormterror Dvalin part of the story. But yeah, there was I think it's the princess, but it was back in December when I popped it up, and I don't quite remember. But I think it was the princess or someone that called themselves the princess takes away the sister. Anyway, some entity takes away your sibling. I guess if you choose the female character.
Yeah, so yeah, you're talking about the very introduction of it. And what I want to focus in on is kind of the story to you. How does that play out in terms of like your stories and other single player games that you felt? Do you feel it is of a better quality, a lesser quality, about the same? And then what pushes you into that thought process?
I think for RPGs, it's about the same. I don't think it seemed like there was a lot of effort put into it to work in the plot. I liked the elements of, hey, we're going to give you enough information to tell you this story, but then they're like, oh, we have books lying around here in the library, you can read up more on it. And they didn't make you watch a whole bunch of extra cutscenes of information that may or may not be somewhat frivolous.
Now, did you read those books in the library and pour into all the lore, or were you on to the next quest point?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it's not a knock on the game, it's a knock on the way I play games. But, if a game has a lot of frivolous story to it, I very much get into click, 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 spacebar, 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 click, click, click.
So you were really missing the lack of a skip button, is what I'm hearing.
It would have been nice, but I'm kind of glad that they didn't. Just because they were relatively brief enough. Where I wanted the skip button was on side quests. Where, like, if they had cutscenes on the side quests, I'm like, I don't need that. Cutscenes on main story, perfect. Let's do it. Cutscenes on side, don't need it.
Okay, fair enough. So I'm going to ask 2 questions. The first is, what language were you playing the game? And the reason why I'm asking that question is the follow-up one, which is, did you want to claw your ears out because of Paimon's voice?
English, and yes. I believe the option when they're like, oh, who's this? And you're like, oh, spare meal. And I was like, yeah, spare meal. That's who she is. I would kill her and eat her. I enjoyed the hunting elements of the game. You could kill animals and turn them into meat. I thought that was great. I wanted to do that with Paimon.
How quickly into the game did you want to do that to Paimon?
Not instantaneously, but certainly by the time we had reached the first statue of the seven.
So I guess then my follow-up would be, since you've had time to get used to that particular wonderful voice, has she leveled off for you, or are you still at the, like, no, Paimon must become my emergency rations now?
The last side quest I did was the cooking one, or a cooking one. There might be multiple, I don't know. Where you're helping this chef hunt boar, but she's not supposed to hunt the boar there, and you're trying to find recipes. I called her spare food again, and I offered her as food to the chef lady in the quest. Paimon was not happy about it. I don't care.
Well, I going into it, I know I told him to be prepared for something that I didn't tell him who or how early it was, but it was funny. I remember the first week after you started playing, you just came to me with a look of, I know who you were talking about now.
Yeah, I did not think there was going to be a character that bad. There was.
So universally, yeah, you are not alone in that. Universally, that Paimon is a little rough, and her need to repeat what main characters just talked about also grinds on people a little bit.
I did find that interesting, not to be too much of a side, like it's completely unimportant. Every once in a while, though, in the game, they would have a statement, and it would be a relatively small statement, and then one other character would repeat it, oftentimes Paimon, but sometimes other characters. And I didn't know if that was not a translation issue, but if that was a common, like, East Asian thing where by repeating it, you were essentially agreeing to or confirming that statement. If that was a cultural difference that I was unaware of, or if that was just a weird storytelling quirk of the game.
I don't think that's the case. I think it's just because they know that it's going to be a long story, and they're trying to, just because, as someone who watches a perhaps excessive amount of anime, that's not necessarily a trope that I see universally. Now, admittedly, it's Japan versus China, but at the risk of getting yelled at, culturally, they're similar enough that I don't believe that it's
okay. Okay, so Paimon being the most annoying character to you, but let's talk about maybe some characters that stood out to you in a positive light, Joe. Whether they be in your part, well, no, let's not go into your party yet. Let's, as far as like what characters you have. As far as characters you've met in story quests that seem important. Who stood out to you, and did you like, whether it be aesthetically or their voice acting or personality, whatever it was.
So just to clarify, this doesn't have to be characters that I know are playable. This could be any character in the story.
Correct. Yeah.
Technically, I guess it applies to both. Lisa is the librarian, correct?
Correct.
That was the first time I was like, wow, this is very forward with the, like, I want to be your mom, like in a creepy way. It was very much a, you need to calm down, woman, attitude with it. And I get that it was like, I'm not going to say selling the character, but, you know, put her in a nice outfit. Oh, I want to take care of you. Let me take care of you. It came off a bit strong, so that stood out.
I said characters you liked, and that's the first one you said, so a little subliminal messaging. But no, I understand what you're saying. It's funny you mentioned her, especially because when the game came out, Steve, I'm sure you remember this, Joe. I don't know. I doubt you heard this, or if you did, you'd forgotten it. But whenever her character was climbing walls, they had some interesting voice lines, as it were. So it's funny that vibe still kind of comes through a little bit, even to a new player that didn't necessarily experience that initial intro to her.
I had heard about that. I did not know it was that character, and that makes total sense now. Yeah,
she
was very excited to be climbing walls.
In any language, really. Now, but to hone back in before we go on that rabbit trail. So, a character that you liked
from a purely like aesthetic enjoyment, you know, being around them. None of the characters really were that important. I mean, the story was, okay, we're going on. I don't think there was a point where I was like, oh, this is, a cool character, or, oh, wow, I hope that, I get to play as that character.
Well, do you mind if maybe we try a different track on this?
Sure.
How about I name a couple characters, or we name a couple
Oh.
characters, and we just get your impression of them?
Okay, that'll work better.
That's a good approach as well. I like that, Steve.
We've kind of started with the starting party, so we had Lisa, so let's go with Amber. What were your thoughts on Amber?
At first, very annoying, but incredibly useful, because she's like the first character you get that's pyro. She's ranged, so she stays in my main party. I know we're doing like party stuff later, and because of that, I think I appreciate her more. But her character at first was like, okay, you're coming off a little annoying, but not terrible. Very much excitable and in your face though.
Okay. Then the other starting character, the third member of your party, which is
Kaya.
Kaya.
Kaya, yeah.
It was interesting because I feel like Amber hangs around the story, or at least early in the story, she hangs around it a lot. Like, you'll have lots of different cutscenes with her. Kaya, you didn't get nearly as much, so I don't think there was any instance where I was like, I didn't really get much of an opinion. He shows up, I think, in 2 cutscenes, at least early on. There is one thing about questing that I'll mention, but maybe we'll get into that in like what I thought about gameplay, because it applies more to that than aesthetics.
No problem. What did you think about? Well, you would know that he's the Archon now. So what do you think about Venti?
Actually, a lot of fun. At first, I was like, "Oh my goodness, this guy just gives you the runaround. He speaks in riddles." But by the end, I was like, "Okay, I can appreciate this. He's somewhat enjoyable." Before you even know, and you're like, oh, "Who's this random dude that's running around?" He's clearly like very important, or I shouldn't say clearly very important. He clearly had major story importance vibes when you first meet him. But by the end, I was like, a lot of fun. A little wordy, and sometimes the songs were but at least, they were trying with it. I'm glad they put songs in for a bard. I'll say that.
I mean, he wouldn't be much of a bard without songs. In that case, last question in regards to character. How did you feel about Diluc, the red-haired Batman fellow?
This is the one that I was most interested in, as far as I believe he is a playable character.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yes.
But he was the one that I was most interested in, like, ooh, he looks like he'd be fun. I'm still unclear as to his role in the city. It's possible that I have gone through and missed something in the story, but is he actually like a Batman character where he sort of operates independent of the system? Or there seemed like there was more there, but I didn't know if that might be spoiler-ish for potentially later.
I wouldn't say it's a spoiler. I don't know if it's part of his character story quest or if it's somewhere else, but basically he used to be a member of the Knights of Favonius, and for reasons he is no longer part of that organization and has decided to go it alone as a vigilante.
Okay.
So that kind of wraps up the discussion there about our initial party, right? That you're introduced. Now, obviously, there's other characters as well that you've run across or come into, but those are the main ones we wanted to kind of get your impression on. I guess we did technically leave out Jean, so maybe let's touch on Jean, and then then we'll move on.
Just sort of a standard like boss intro, or not boss, but commander intro. It very much felt like, oh, okay, this is who you're going to report to. It seemed as if there was a little bit of a backstory, particularly once you get further along and you see her interactions with Diluc. There seemed to be some sort of intrigue there that would be interesting to explore.
Okay, all right. And so moving on now from characters that you've met, and as far as like personalities, your interactions, takes on that, I want to focus and kind of shift the conversation to your party. You kind of touched on that Amber is always in your party, and you're using her because she's your pyro character and a ranged user, right, being a bow user. But who are the other characters that you have built up in your parties, and what's let's just start with that.
So my base, I'm just going out to explore and see things, and I want to have a variety of characters. I've got my character, Kaya, Amber, and Noelle.
Okay.
So that's pretty much who I run with on average. If I need electricity, I'm probably putting in Lisa, but I also have Kujo Sara, who does electro, and I have used her in certain situations as well.
And that kind of leads into my next question. If you've done some polls on banners, I would imagine you did the beginner banner. And if you've done any standard banners, polls, or have you pulled on any of the limited character banners?
So I have finished my beginner character banners. I did the 20 polls on those.
Okay.
And then I've done 30 limited banner polls. I'm trying to remember her name, and I wish I had taken down that note. The fire bow user, because I wanted someone that was better than Amber.
Oh, Yoimiya?
Yeah, I think that was her name.
Yeah.
Because I kind of wanted an upgrade there. Sorry, Amber, but seen a noticeable drop off recently. No.
And your character, so we haven't hit any 5 stars yet. It sounds like, unfortunately, thus kind of the downfall of those rates. And then as far as your character levels right now, where are you in that regard? What level is the characters themselves? I'm not talking about your adventure level, but the actual level of your characters.
I have my main character at 40, and then I have Kaya and Amber at 40, and then Noelle at 20, and then a couple other characters at 20.
So you're in the 20 to 40 range.
Yeah, people that I haven't used as much, or like sort of Noelle sort of sits in my flex spot. Although I would ascend her and get her higher, I don't have one of her materials. I think I have to go to the mountain in order to get that. And I've quested around there, and I've done quite a bit of stuff, but I haven't quite come across the berry that is needed for her ascension material. And I haven't like ground it out to look for it. It's just every time I go there, I'm like, all right, well, I'll take a look around and see if I see it this time. Haven't yet, so I don't know if it's in a specific spot or only grows in small areas.
If you are looking for specific mats, there is a map, an interactive map that Hoyoverse provides that will help you locate materials and stuff like that. Again, things that they don't necessarily tell you in the game, but
Yeah.
So with those characters, so with the exploration, like I said, we're kind of getting into the gacha elements of it and having to grind out for materials, having to farm bosses or farm things in those polls. But one last thing I want to touch on before we shift into that, that shock to the system, as it were, the introduction to gacha for you, would be the music. Because you're not playing on mobile, you're playing this on the PC client, for clarification, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And when you are playing, do you play with the sound on?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on the musical score or anything that you're hearing in terms of sound effects, but mostly the music?
I find it very soothing, but it's not like I've never come across. I take that back. I was gonna say I've never come across a moment where I was like, ooh, yeah. But there have been a couple, like whenever you initiate, they're not like a boss fight, but like a world boss, somebody that has a larger than standard health bar.
Sure.
You sort of get this up-tempo music playing.
Okay.
And so I appreciate small elements like that, where it's not a scripted entry. So, obviously when you fight Dvalin, there's scripted music. You had a cutscene beforehand and then it goes into it. So, and that's great, enjoyable. It wasn't something that I took particular notice of. But what I did like is, all right, I'm going through the world. Oh, I've, been noticed by this ruin hunter or something like that. And then it picks up this up-tempo music.
Okay.
That's a nice little quality of life appreciation.
Now, you mentioned you have had a whoa moment, or you had not had a moment that made you go whoa?
No, that was the whoa moment. Was, it would be, you'd be going along and all of a sudden,
Gotcha.
Boom.
Okay. I see.
I appreciated that small little.
As opposed to a tiny red arrow on your screen letting you know you've aggroed something, it's battle
Yeah,
music. Okay.
exactly.
Time to run or turn around and see what's coming after me. Got it. Okay. Well, now I want to kind of shift the talk. Instead of talking about the game in general as a whole, let's talk about the gotcha elements of the game in terms of how you. Well, I mean, what's your take? What's your impression on what you've seen in that element?
So we talked, about I hadn't really played any gotcha games. I have played some idle games. And so like mobile, like, the stupid farm games or whatnot, stuff like that, where it has a similar, I won't call them, maybe they're cousins to gotcha games, but it has a similar monetization where you have a resource that is scarce in idle games. It's time. In gotcha games, it's usually whatever currency I guess you're using to pull for characters or progress. And it seems like, all right, at least in idle games, you get a lot up front and then that starts to dwindle fairly quickly, and then they'll have like certain events that'll be like, all right, here's, you can get a bunch of resources real quick here, but then those dwindle again. I was kind of surprised that as I was playing, and I imagine this does not last for the entirety of it, of Genshin, that it seemed like the pool of things you can do to gain primo gems, the scarce resource, I guess,
The
in
premium
this
currency, yes.
instance, yeah, the pool of things you could do increased as you leveled up, which I was sort of unused to. I'm more used to like a funnel shape where you start with the most and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, like I said, I bet that this changes once you get to a certain level. It probably forms like a bell curve of available primo gems, but your dailies are not something you're introduced to right away. You have to get to adventure rank 12 before they even open that up. You get more access to various chests and not Tomb of the Depths, Shrine of the Depths, which I think had like 100 primo gems in it each or something like that. Not an insignificant amount. And then on top of that, they had the events. So I was kind of surprised by that. Again, having only done the intros though, I suspect that once you get higher level, once you've cleared out a lot of chests or whatnot, that begins to dwindle back down. But I don't know. You guys probably could tell me better.
Do you feel that, because you mentioned, you've done some polls, you said about 30 or so on the standard are unfortunately without a 5-star. Do you feel like not being able to play the full roster of characters, does that affect you in any form or fashion? Are you kind of like, you're happy kind of exploring things with the team you have, and then do you find joy in building different characters? Like what's, as opposed to you're buying a AAA game, you have access to all the characters on a roster in an RPG typically, right? And you can mix and match, as it were.
I do not mind, really. I never once looked at it and said, "Oh man, I really wish I had access to all of this at once." Honestly, it's a little overwhelming as it is. I will get into, as you're going along and playing. At first, I could hack and slash through everything. First little area. And then you sort of have to start using Amber for like puzzles. I say Amber because Fire was, I think,
Yeah, you have to
the
use a
main
Pyro character.
thing.
She's just the
Yeah,
one that you have. Yeah.
exactly. But you have to start using Pyro to activate puzzles and various other things. And then you have to start using it in combat and combining it with other elements and stuff like that. So they layered on the combat in that way. And it was at that point where I started saying, okay, it could be useful to have someone that could do this better or in a different way. I don't have a Pyro, well, up until recently, I didn't have a Pyro melee character. And so I was like, it could be useful to have melee Pyro.
And Steve, I think you had a question for Joe on characters and farming things as well, right?
Yeah, so you had mentioned earlier that you got Kujo Sara as a character,
Correct.
and I guess this somewhat applies to Ningguang as well, because you mentioned that you'd gotten somewhat deep into Leeway, but you hadn't fully completed. But how did you feel about, or I guess I should say, did you have any difficulties leveling her, or are you finding any issues with her because of the way that her materials work?
I honestly didn't know that her materials worked differently. Is her stuff more specific to Liyue? I have not ascended her. She's level 20.
Okay.
Yeah, so for Ning Wong, yeah, she's from Liyue, so a lot of her character mats are there. And then for Kujo Sara, she's actually comes from Inazuma, which is the third region. And so yeah, I was wondering if, and Steve was, well, if you've leveled that character, have you hit the wall yet? And it sounds like not yet on that particular
I
character.
I have hit the wall of not being able to ascend them. I've gotten to level 20, but I can't ascend them. So,
But you can't ascend
or
them due to not because you don't just straight up don't have access to the continent that the materials are on. It's due to what, traveler or adventure rank, I think,
no,
or
I'm
world
not
level.
quite sure. I haven't tried to go gather those materials just because I've got so much other stuff that was available to me. I was like, okay, well, I'll get to it if I get to it, sort of thing.
Okay.
But I had other characters that I could ascend and level up for stuff. I know that for Kujosara specifically, I am short her ascension mats, but again, I hadn't really looked for them. I ascended most of the characters that I did just because they were either in my main party and used them a lot, or because I already had the mats for it, and the adventure rank booklet was like, ascend 3 characters and you can complete this little quest. So I did find a lot of the game was me going through, making sure I had checked all the things that say complete and click and claim reward.
Smart. Good.
It's it's a big portion of the gameplay, which I don't think is necessarily a drawback. I think some people might say, "Oh, it's not the most entertaining gameplay," but most games to a certain extent are complete the thing, do the thing, accept the reward. It's just a different method of doing it. Instead of clicking on a dialogue box with the one priest guy, I just click the checklist.
So,
Six of one, half dozen of the other.
so has the gotcha vibe, has it tempted you at all to purchase anything within the game, or do you feel are you feeling pressured by the game to purchase anything?
Absolutely not. I I would say there's not a pressure by the game per se, but there is sort of this implicit like, you know, hey, you don't have enough, you could always buy it offer there, but I haven't seen anything be like Paimon hasn't popped up and been like, it looks like you're low on Primo Gems, you could always buy them. Which is nice. I wouldn't like that, and I wouldn't be spending money on it anyway. I definitely approach this from a free to play only standpoint. Not that I have anything against people that want to spend their money on this that way. I appreciate that the game's free to play, but I haven't felt any explicit pressure from the game, nor any internal pressure from, oh, I need this character.
I mean, that's probably for the best. And having discussed the past and the present and the future here, or the past and the present, do you, if we weren't holding a gun against your head, or you weren't required to do this, you're not really required to play it even to come back on, but if not for our request, would you continue playing Genshin?
I was sort of thinking about this, and I don't know. I don't think so. And I'll explain why. The gotcha element actually really didn't have much of an effect on it. I just didn't enjoy the. I shouldn't say I didn't enjoy. I enjoyed the game. It just made me want to play other games more. I really wish that Genshin was done as a traditional RPG or an MMORPG, because I feel like the world's so much fun to explore, but there are elements to it that just they don't quite work with me. Maybe it's the action RPG, ARPG sort of elements to it, but I found myself thinking, this is great. It kind of makes me want to play WoW again. Or, this is great. I kind of want it to be an RPG, or I'd like it if I could level my character more specifically, as opposed to collecting these characters and then leveling them individually as part of a team. And so, it's probably likely that I will continue to hop on periodically, and I may even try and finish out this banner and grab that 5-star that I was pulling on and see if I can get her at the 50-50 pity, or
Hopefully
whatever you
sooner, but yeah,
yeah.
hopefully you win the 50-50, but at
Yeah,
the very least, let's see who your
but
first 5-star is.
exactly. But would I play it regularly? And I think the answer is no. My time schedule is just, I have a limited amount of time for games, and I feel like this is one that benefits from you popping on daily, even if it's just a little bit. But that's not the kind of gamer I am anymore. Like I don't play games daily. I probably play twice a week, two days a week, and I might play for 4 hours on those days. But it's just one that I don't think can quite hold my attention. Um, but like I said, I'll probably play around to at least find out what my 5-star is. And I may pop in from time to time and just sort of explore the world, because again, I really do enjoy the world that they created. I just feel I don't necessarily enjoy the way you interact with the world, I should say.
Okay.
I kind of wish it was more traditional RPG.
Fair enough. I mean, you did mention that your time slots are much more siloed, that you can't log in day to day. Would I guess, considering what I know about the way the story goes and so on and so forth, would you be interested in just ignoring kind of the gotcha side of it, since rolling for characters and so forth? Is there enough in the story that you would at least want to play till the end of that? Are you interested in would you be interested in playing enough to see the end of the story, or is it more just you want to log on and kill time running around the world, so on and so forth?
I think it would be interesting to find out the rest of the story. That definitely takes the backseat to sort of that exploration element. I'm gonna kick this back to MMORPGs because it's sort of the closest thing I have. Is I loved going into the new zone and sort of exploring it, and that was fun. It was neat. And then, going up to the mountain, you get the ice world. Then going over to Lioa, and you got your mountains and just different flavor of the area, I should say. I don't think that's enough to hold me to the game. I think the story element might be, but I don't know if I care enough. I don't think it was is investing enough for me. Most of the games I play these days aren't particularly story driven. They're much more mechanically driven.
And
And
the gameplay loop itself for you,
yeah,
you kind of you feel it almost requires you to daily touch base with it.
it that and it was just not as satisfying in general, as compared to, like I said, a traditional RPG where instead of leveling up components of a character, for instance, you have team. I almost treat the team as a character, because that's you assemble 4 skills, roughly speaking, on one instance, and then you flip between them. But because you are doing that as a team, you have to jump between characters. And so the gameplay loop of, all right, I'm mid combat. Oh, this person put a shield up. Well, I'm going to have to burn it down. Got to jump to Amber. Jump to Amber. Now I have to be shooting arrows and doing that. So I got to run back and give myself some space between me and the enemy. Okay, now I've burned the shield down. Now I flip back to this character. I almost wish it was all condensed on one character that I could just run with that. And maybe that's picky of me, or pedantic, but it just felt like there was an unnecessary level of change in the gameplay loop of, all right, gotta flip between these characters that don't play the same way, I should say. Like, my main character, hack and slash up front, melee. All right, now I gotta go arrows. Then I switch over to a tank because I use Noelle to tank some enemies, and it really felt like I was playing too many different archetypes in one character, I should say.
Yeah, you didn't feel that your team came together in one cohesive gameplay
Yeah.
style.
And perhaps that's something that gets solved as you have a deeper character pool. I don't know.
How
But
would you mentioned that, basically each character is functionally a skill and kind of an ult. How would you feel about a more turn-based system, like Final Fantasy style turn-based, where each of them would have been a character on the field kind of doing
I
their own thing? Would that, do you think you would have enjoyed that more, or
I actually did think about that, and I was like, that would be another way they could have done this. Would have been, let me have all of them at one time and have it be
Hmm.
turn-based, like a tactics style.
well, part of the reason I bring that up
Funny you should mention that, Joe, because Steve was kind of going where I had alluded to earlier as far as talking about the future. Because we would like to follow up with you, I think, in a future episode. Just like you said, whether it be casually if you're still dipping in with Genshin, but if you're not and it was so off-putting for whatever reason, especially now that you mentioned the turn-based thing, is to consider another Hoyoverse game, which was the Honkai Star Rail, which is basically Space Genshin. Now, it's not as exploration as content. It's a little bit more linear in that regards, but it is a turn-based. Think, yeah, like Steve said, more Final Fantasy, not ATB, not like original Final Fantasy VII, but turn-based as opposed to action RPG. And I know there's a point in that game that Steve and I, if you were open to trying it out, would want you to get to. But what are your thoughts on trying a different Hoyoverse game that has a different gameplay loop or mechanic?
I'd totally be open to it because they created a very compelling world. So I think that as a company, they at least have some level of storytelling competency and are able to create something that's engaging. So yeah, I think I'd be open to that.
Yeah, I mean, we'd love to get that. We'll work out the details, of course, but we would love to have you back on. And then if you've played any more Genshin, I'm itching to hear who your first 5-star would be. And you kind of touched on a little bit that some of, I think, the cohesiveness, excuse me, of the team can be solved a little bit if your roster of characters is a little bit bigger. So I think that's something where maybe the gotcha element is hindering your experience in terms of that. But like you mentioned, yeah, the story, while not groundbreaking, is something you're intrigued to see how it develops. And the beauty, I think, of Genshin is that Hoyoverse does have a plan to finish that, and it is going to take a long time for them to do it. And I think that allows you to casually dabble in here and there, and you're not missing anything because it will always be there. There's no time pressure for like main story stuff. But if you're open to that, man, we'll like I said, talk off screen here and get that worked out and discuss. But that's all I have. Steve, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
no? I think we're good. Thank you, Joe, for coming on and talking with us about your experience. And
Thank you guys for having me.
yeah,
Yeah, man. Appreciate you taking the time. Yeah, I want to again thank Joe for showing up this week and sinking some time into Genshin, giving it a try. So overall, if you had to, I guess, rate the entire experience playing Genshin, 1, awful, terrible, you're never recommending this to anybody, 10, oh my god, fantastic experience, where would you put it? I think you're probably in the middle, but if you had to put a number on it, where would you go?
I think I'd probably put it like 8. I really enjoyed my time playing it. Again, the thing that I think was most telling for me was I said, I really enjoy this game. I wish it was more like this because I think I would have enjoyed it more. It feels like it could be that game where you could really sink some hours into. There are just a couple things that I was like, it doesn't really jive or work for me, and I don't have the time to sink into it.
That's
The
yeah, that's
appropriate amount.
fair. As we grow up, yeah, the allotted hours we can spend gaming does tend to shift, and when we can game also shifts. So that's an 8 out of 10. That's really good. So a well polished game. You can see its merits.
Yeah.
Not fully necessarily made for you in terms of the games you're liking, but you did get some enjoyment, which is good. Glad we didn't waste your time with that. So again, I do want to say another special thanks to our guest Joe for joining us this week. We'll be sure to have him back on for some follow-ups and then hinting at maybe a Honkai Star Rail journey as well for him. And then for all you guys out there, we want to thank you guys for joining us as well this week. Be sure to share with us your first Gacha experience. If you remember what the first Gacha game you played was, or maybe if Genshin was your first Gacha game, what was your experience like? Or maybe, like us, you have a friend that tried it out, or maybe you listen to this episode and you are inspired to have a friend try it out. Let us know what their experience is. If you did like this episode, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the channel. Or you can email us now at brohoyopod@gmail.com with questions, or if you have suggestions for the show. Feel free to join us next week when we discuss our daily and weekly missions as well as battle passes. We made a choice, go